Okay, so at this point you should have finished the exam form, and we're going to move on to chapter 23, which is ecology and the environment. I'm going to try to break this up into two separate videos, and that way you can take a break in between if you need. So what is ecology? Ecology, it's the relationship between organisms and the environment. So it's us and our environment, the trees and their environment, all of the relationships you can think between an organism, something that's living, and the environment. And the environment is full of factors that affect an organism during its lifetime. So you can think of a variety of different factors that could affect an organism. There's biotic factors, which these are living things that affect an organism. And then there's abiotic factors, which are non-living things that affect an organism. So anytime you see the word abiotic, it's going to refer to something that's non-living. And then biotic, it's got that root word of bio. It's going to be something that is living. So there is a hierarchy, if you will, of an ecological system. The organism is you, the smallest living unit. The population is the group of organisms of the same species, so like the human population. Communities are going to be interacting groups of populations of different species. So these might be different types of bird species and how they interact. They're communities. A niche is a role in community for each organism, so kind of like we each have our own special role to fill. And then the ecosystem is going to be everything interacting, all the organisms in the area and their interactions with the abiotic surroundings. So if we look at the image right here, we have the individual organism at the bottom, the niche, the population of species, and then you have this web where it's got the interaction of everything within the community. And then all of the things, the abiotic examples would be energy, climate, weather, minerals, water, air, pH, salinity, temperature, soil, sunlight, etc. Those are all going to fall under abiotic because climate is not living, minerals are not living, water is not living, but they're all essential to how a species or an organism exists in its world. The food chain is a sequence of organisms that feed on one another, and everybody is somewhere in the food chain. Producers are going to be things like plants, which convert sunlight into energy via photosynthesis. Okay, so if we think back, these are going to be our plants, anything that is green, has chlorophyll, has plant cells. They produce organic material from inorganic material. Green plants, algae, cyanobacteria. So at the food chain over here, it's at the very bottom. Consumers cannot get direct energy from the sun, so even though vitamin D is essential to all of our processes in our body, and the sunlight is essential in that vitamin D synthesis, we do not photosynthesize and we don't get energy from the sun, even though we do know that the sun has a significant impact on mental health and keeping you feeling good. These consumers can only obtain energy in the form of organic matter. So animals, like primary consumers, are herbivores. They are plant eaters, so they're going to eat the producer directly. These would be things like grasshoppers. You have secondary consumers, which are carnivores, meat eaters. So over here on the image, we have a primary carnivore of a spider, which would eat the grasshopper. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. So these are, I was trying to think of an example, but I'm pretty sure omnivores like raccoons, they eat a little bit of both. Decomposers are organisms that decompose dead bodies into CO2, H2O, ammonia, and other inorganic compounds, which are important for replenishing the cycle. So these are bacteria and fungi. So if you remember back to the video where I talked about mushrooms growing where bodies were buried, that's because they're decomposing those bodies into important organisms that have to be replenished back. So you can see here we are at the top of the food chain. Realistically, we have no predators, even though animals can attack, blah blah blah. The biggest predator in our life is probably each other, but it's not as part of the food cycle. So we live a very privileged life that we are not at the bottom of the food chain, that we are at the very top. So energy relationships among organisms. The trophic level is the stage of energy flow throughout the ecosystem. So back on this image, on the right-hand side, there was trophic levels where it tells you kind of the hierarchy in which the energy is being relayed. So the first level are our producers, the plants. The second level are our herbivores. They're in orange that eat the plants. Third level are primary carnivores, which eat the herbivores. And the fourth level is secondary carnivores like ourselves, which eat primary carnivores. So we eat pigs, cows, chickens, things like that, which are further up in the food chain than our producers. There's examples. You have grass, mouse. Mouse eats the grass. Snake eats the mouse. Hawk eats the snake. Okay. Now, it's not to say that a hawk wouldn't eat a mouse. As you go up, you can kind of cross these, and a hawk may eat a mouse, but they're going to get the majority of energy from eating something large like a snake. And then your decomposers, everything feeds back into the decomposers, which is that little pyramid right there on the left. So there are lots of roles in an ecosystem. You do not need to specifically know any of these terms other than the ones we've talked about: producers, consumers, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and decomposers. However, there are two other groups which are scavengers. These are things like coyotes, skunks, vultures, crayfish. They just eat whatever they can get, and they really like, they're more likely to eat things like roadkill, things that are already dead, that have already been, they're easy. They don't have to hunt. They just have to find something that's already dead. A parasite is something that lives in or on an organism and uses it for food. So tick, tapeworm, many insects fall into the parasite. Okay, so just a kind of a table summary of all those definitions. All right, so energy flow in the system. We're not going to worry about energy flow in the system. Okay. But this is an image of a food web. Okay, so just to make sure you guys do not have to take notes on this, I hope you are listening and you don't have me on mute, because you will have written a lot for not any information. All right, here's an example of a food web. It's very convoluted. You can see here that there's two separate tracks, but then there are all kinds of arrows pointing in between. But in the end, everything feeds back into a bacteria and fungi. And so you could see old leaves, dead twigs, they all feed into the mushrooms, fungi, bacteria, birds, chipmunks, mice, leaf-eating insects. You can see the leaf-eating insects could be grazing on birds. So all kinds of interesting relationships. All right, so now we're going to talk about types of biomes, and I'm actually going to break this into 3 parts. So here's your first part. They're easier to upload on YouTube if they're smaller and shorter. So I'm going to pause it here, give you a chance to take a break, and then come back.